Hello everyone and welcome to our Ask the Expert / Ask Me Anything series. Today is one of several 30-minute webinars that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks and months where you can submit questions up front to us and we'll prepare the answers with a couple of slides with graphics, etc. With the goal of providing an in-depth answer, hopefully. Unlike in some of the other webinars where we only had maybe half a minute or a minute to answer questions, this is really meant to go into depth to fully answer your questions. And so the best course of action is, if you want to get your questions answered, to submit them up front. We can see on the slide right now the link to the submission form. Just go there, select the topic. Every webinar is going to have a different topic. We're going to show you the webinar agenda here in a moment so you can see what the upcoming topics are. And you just submit your questions, we prepare the answers, and we're going to present the answers and of course your questions during the webinar. Now, as I said, this is one of several webinars that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks. Today we're going to focus on SAP Fiori, so we're going to have Alessandro and Jennifer as our expert today. They're going to introduce themselves here in a moment. Before we get started, however, just a couple of housekeeping questions as always. First of all, the webinar is recorded right now, so you will receive a link to the recording. If you have any question, if you forgot to submit your questions up front, not a problem either. We're going to have half an hour. So use the questions control or the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel to type in your questions. We're going to keep an eye on those and we're going to answer them after we've answered all the ones that were submitted up front. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Alessandro and Jennifer, and they're going to walk us through the answers to the questions that we've gotten up front.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alessandro Benzer. I'm in charge of the Americas operations within Xiting. I'm a senior consultant when it comes to SAP access control, GRC, IAG, access control in the cloud, basically identity access governance, as well as S/4HANA and SAP Fiori authorizations. Jenny?
Yes. Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm a senior security consultant by Xiting in Switzerland, and I have much experience for S4 migration project and SAP Fiori authorization concepts. So yes, I'm the expert here. So let us start now.
Perfect. Then let's look into the questions. So there were a lot of different questions submitted. We consolidated them into just some of them, because some of them were very similar. So we didn't necessarily post every single one onto the slides. So we just try to generalize them and consolidate them, and we'll try to answer them up front. And here, Jenny, you want to get started with the first few here?
Yes, thanks for the takeover. The first question here is regarding the default values for the OData services for SAP UI5 apps. You know that SAP UI5 apps are running with OData services in the background. So you need the OData services in your authorization roles, and you need the default values from that. The problem is here, that is fact, that SAP delivers not all necessary authorization objects for our data services, but in the higher S/4HANA releases, it will be better. So in this case, my inbox is a general application. Yes, it's the replacement of the SAP best practice, SAP user workplace. So in this case, you will have different work items, and this app has to be configured before you can use it. And therefore, the OData service task processing is a general OData service, and he needs authorization objects depends on your configuration. So in this case, the default values are missing or empty in the SO24, but you have to maintain it. Yeah, it is a daily task for all authorization experts, admins, to get this missing values to this knowledge base. Yes, that is a fact. The second one is regarding the S/4HANA conversion. So in this case, you will have existing PFCG roles and you would like to migrate it. In this case, my recommendation is that you analyze your existing roles of the changes that will get with the migration to S4HANA. And then you will see that SAP GUI transaction will be replaced with the new releases. Yeah, some transactions will be obsolete or replaced with Fiori apps with new transaction. So here's my recommendation that you analyze your existing roles regarding the SAP GUI, classical GUI access, but also for the Fiori usage. So you should not split the roles or your authorization concept in Fiori roles and GUI, classical GUI authorization roles. Yeah, because when you add a Fiori catalog, you see here in the slide, to your role menu in the PFCG, then you will get automatically proposal values in the role menu added. So the profile generator checks your content in the Fiori catalog, and then he automatically includes all necessary proposals in your role menu. And so it is not necessary and not really possible to split on the technical way to split in both roles or in two roles, Fiori and backend roles. So yes, use your existing roles and add the Fiori content. Okay. So then you will have a role menu with classical SAP GUI transaction, web Dimbro application, and Fiori catalogs, and then Fiori groups or spaces. Yes. Alessandro,
yep.
The next question. The next question is the best practice approach for roles. In this case, I disagree with you that composite roles are best practice approach because composite roles usually compromise the objects of an authorization concept because of the unconscious overlay of authorization and can possibly lead onto unwanted side effects. It changes single roles. So in this case, my recommendation is create single roles, and single roles should be define the transactional scope and the content of the Fiori usage. And then maybe you can create also composite roles to bundle these single roles. But yeah, when you create too small single roles, then you will get the problem of side effects. Yeah, when you support your roles, then you will see that when you added a transaction to a single role, then the single role are included in many composite roles, and then you will get cross effects. And so many customers has many single roles with one or two transactions, and that is not really the target of an authorization concept. Yeah, authorization concept must be transparency, consistency, maintainability, and that is really possible when you use single roles, and you should avoid to use composite roles. So in this case, regarding the Fiori authorization, when you use single roles, then add the Fiori catalog to the role menu again.
And I think one thing to mention there, Jenny, or maybe a question to you that was also just popped up in the chat was regarding the best practice recommendations when it comes to using the spaces and pages. And if you build those task rows with one application in one role, and you try to assign it then through multiple composites, how does that affect the Fiori front-end build when it comes to the spaces pages? Can you say something towards that as well?
The problem is the performance issue, yeah, because you will get many catalogs, Fiori catalogs in the App Finder, and then you have a dependency to the space. Yeah, you will answer it in the next question. So we will see that there are some dependencies between the spaces and the catalog assignments. So my recommendation is that you should create roles based on job function, and the same way you should do for your Fiori concept. So the catalog is based, in the best case, on a job function, yeah, controller, purchaser, and so on. And then you include all necessary Fiori apps for the purchaser or controller, and then add it to the role menu in the PFCG. Okay, and then you have one single point of truth for the controller. Yeah, you will see there's a catalog controller. This catalog includes all necessary Fiori apps. And then you can extend or remove apps, and you have not any side effects to other roles or Fiori catalogs.
Perfect. Then let's continue. There were questions in regards to change logs with CD HDR, CD post, and so on. One of the questions here, then also others in the same regards, when it comes to the Fiori content, meaning the spaces, pages, catalogs, groups, there's no change logs for them. So if you make changes to those to that Fiori content, it's not recorded in the change document. When it comes to changes that applications do to certain tables that have the change, the table change active, for example, that will be recorded. But that's not necessarily the change done to a Fiori application or to Fiori content. So for business data, if it's doing the track changes or recording a change data, then yes, but not for the Fiori applications itself. Then a lot of questions were in regards to the spaces and pages concept. I think a lot of you guys are now in the process of migrating from the groups approach to the spaces pages approach, and there were a lot of issues or some struggles with it along the way, simply because of the new concept. And a lot of you guys, I had a couple of conversations with a couple of our customers over the last couple of weeks and months, try to come up with a design for and build a design for the spaces approach that didn't necessarily work. And one of the questions also here was that someone was saying that my apps don't show up on the page, even though the user is authorized to those apps. So basically, from the app finder, you can see that I have the authorizations to an app. I can also start it, the app works, but it won't show up on my page. And let's just take a quick look why that is. We remember from the space and page and approach that we basically have to build spaces shown green here, and then we assign, or we first have to create and then we assign one or many pages to that space. And within that page, we then define sections, and then we assign tiles, which represents a Fiori application, to those sections. And then at the end of the day, the user, from a authorizations perspective, we assign the space through a PFCG role to the user. And then the user will see the spaces and the pages and the apps that he or she is authorized to access. Now, the problem here is, if I have the authorization, for example, here to the app process collection work lists, then I need to have that authorization from that very catalog that the app was added to that page. And the reason for that is because when we look here in the background here with a table, in the table that defines the pages, it basically contains the page ID and then also the tile catalog ID from which catalog that tile was added. That means for that very app here, and we just see the ID here on the right hand side, which obviously doesn't tell you anything, but basically what that means is that in the table behind those pages, it has the reference back to that catalog. That means that if I authorize the space that contains that page here to an end user, they need to have that catalog in order for them to see the tile down here. If I have that tile authorized from another catalog or from 10 other catalogs, it doesn't matter. I'm still not able to see. Even if I have SAP all assigned in the extreme case, I'm still not able to see the app on the page because I need to have that very catalog ID assigned to myself through a PFCG role, and only then the app will show up here. That's a little bit unfortunate. Jennifer and I, we talked about that in the past because it would be very nice if it would work that way. Unfortunately, it does not. What customers can do, obviously you have to correct it and then maybe raise an OSS message with SAP to address that concern, because we also believe it would be very nice to have that functionality, that it would just show up if you're authorized to that tile. But as of today, it doesn't work that way. So you really need to be very careful. That's also why from a design perspective, we kind of have to build a space, a page, and then a role and a catalog. So it needs kind of like a one-to-one relationship. We cannot say we just build one catalog or hundreds of catalogs, and then we try to combine on the space and page level. That doesn't work. It needs to be a one-to-one relationship, and that's because the way SAP, as of today, is storing the data of the entire concept. And that's very often, or that's primarily the reason why those apps won't show up on the page. And therefore, when we go back to one of the webinars we had about the spaces pages, I remember when we added the apps to the page, it's always recommended to use the derived from role approach, where basically the apps that are assigned to the roles that the space is assigned to, we can derive and click them into the page. If we don't do that and we just search for an application, that application might be added to hundreds of catalogs, and then I have to know which one I take, and that's very often where the confusion happens, and that's also very often where the issue happens, and that's why it doesn't work. Because it doesn't work if we use like a standard catalog or technical catalog. That doesn't work. It needs to come from that very catalog that we're going to assign to the end user. I hope that makes sense. Great. Then another question, I think that's also one of the issues that where we see a lot in customer projects is the forward navigation within Fiori applications, where a user basically, and Jennifer will answer that, where basically a user has access to an application, they see the data, the application seems to be working, but then they try to click on something and it doesn't work. You get an error because the forward navigation to the next application is not properly configured. And Jenny, let me make you presenter so you can share your screen.
Yeah.
We can show that. Now you should be able to share. Yep, perfect. We can see it.
Okay. So, Alessandra, can you see the Fiori App Library now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, I will give you an example for an overview page, a Fiori App, a dashboard. And in this case, it will be the overview inventory processing. Yes. It is a dashboard, and a dashboard in Fiori will have embedded apps. And when you add this overview inventory processing app to a catalog, then you have the dashboard, but the dashboard has no content. Yeah, first. So you have to go to the implementation information, chapter related apps, and then you will get more information about this dashboard. And this is really important that you know that here you will find more information about the related apps. And here you see this overview page has embedded 7 other applications. So that means when you will authorize the overview inventory processing app, then you have to add this app ID, but also these. Yeah. So then you will get the dashboard. Yeah, it's here. You see it. That is the overview inventory processing dashboard. And here you see 7 applications. Yeah. And these applications are necessary also for the user. And in the example from last week from my colleague, we have the problem that you see that some applications here have real-time data directly on the tile. Yeah, here you see we have the application recent material documents, and then you see a preview of some data. And when you click on this first entry, then my colleague got an error message from the system that the navigation target is not possible. And then we started our troubleshooting. And the problem here is that when you click on the first entry, then the system calls an URL in the browser for the details. And the details is also another target mapping. So in this case, you have to add an additional target mapping that you can jump in the good issue here for the first entry. So here I go back. You see that is the dashboard, okay? And then you have 7 apps, and this information you will find in the implementation information, okay? But the preview that you can jump into the details directly from the tile, this information is missing here. That is the problem. So that is why SAP recommended the customer that you should have a sandbox. In the best case, you should have a fully activated sandbox with content. And then you can start with your troubleshooting on the sandbox. Yes, you go to the Fiori Launchpad, started the overview inventory processing dashboards. You will see 7 other applications. And when you click directly on the real data on the preview on the tile, then you will see the URL in the browser, and the URL have the information for the semantic object and the action. And then you can go back to the content manager in the SAP GUI, started with the search of the tiles and added the semantic object, and then you will search the semantic object with the necessary action, and then you also add it to your Fiori catalog. And then the overview inventory processing dashboard is running as expected. Okay, that is the problem here. First, you have to check if it is a dashboard, an overview page. Then click on the implementation chapter and the section related app. And then you also have to check if there's any jumps possibilities in these embedded apps. Then you have to analysis further to find out which is the necessary semantic object and action. That's missing in the Fiori app library currently. This preview jump in the details. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Then let me take a screen back.
Mm-hmm.
Just 1 second. Oh, everything popped up. Great. We still have a few questions or a couple of questions in the chat box that we'll get to in a second. One other question that popped out a lot and we were asked a lot is regarding must changes. And we talked about that before, especially when we go down the route with the spaces pages approach, where we have that one-to-one relationship, which is absolutely from our perspective not perfect, but it's a great approach. And I'm saying not perfect because I also just read through the questions that you guys just asked online here. It's also regarding the spaces approach when you have multiple spaces that are basically the same space. So if you have, let's say, you replicate the AP accountant space 5 times, maybe for different regions or whatever the case might be. If you do that and you assign the same space, but basically in 5 different spaces to the same user, then AP accountant will be shown 5 times on the GUI. So it's not perfect if you use that approach. So we have to think about that very carefully when we start the design. What I wanted to say was actually regarding the mass processing. So when we have to create a lot of catalogs, a lot of space, a lot of pages and sections, all that SAP offers us is a one-to-one approach. It's a very, very manual approach, especially when it comes to the spaces pages. We have 2 Fiori applications at the end of the day that allows us to click through and create it, and that can be very time consuming, especially if we move the entire organization onto Fiori and do the Fiorization, and everyone needs the Fiori access. It's a lot of effort to get through that. Unfortunately, there's nothing in SAP standard that allows you to mass process. And the only tool that we know, which is obviously our tool here, the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, we have tools that allow us to mass create, mass change, mass delete, mass edit, mass display, whatever you want to do in mass that SAP doesn't offer. That's what the XMS can do for you. So if you see that there's a lot of effort, come and talk to us. Our tools are obviously available as perpetual licenses, but also from a subscription based. We can rent it for a project duration. If you need it for a couple of months to get your Fiori stuff together and you want to save a lot of time, then I always recommend using a tool. With that, Jennifer, let's just go and look into the questions. There was one regarding authorization objects, and was asking whether we can find the same information in transaction SU21 that we can also find for transaction codes. I'm not sure if you want to answer it or if I should. So maybe I just take it. Basically from authorizations perspective, from the authorization objects and authorization field perspective, it's still the same thing. So there's very similar authorization objects that are used in Fiori that are also used in transactions. Most of them are exactly the same. Obviously, there are new authorization objects and new fields, also maybe specifically for the Fiori content itself. There's obviously new stuff, but in general, it's still an ABAP-based system in the background. And also the front end, it's an ABAP-based system. That means the authorization checks, everything that's going on is still ABAP. It's still the same approach as we have for transaction codes. Obviously, the start authorizations are different because when we start a Fiori application, it's the S service versus on the transaction side, it's the ST code. But then everything else behind is very similar. And it also means from an authorization object perspective, you can look all those up in transaction SU21. You can look up the authorization fields. All that is still available. So from that perspective, nothing really changes. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and you will see in the STR trace the necessary object for your data service. Yeah, you will see that missing authorizations there. So it's the same way.
Mm-hmm. Then Jenny, maybe a question for you, and let me just read it out loud here. It's in regards to the spaces that I just mentioned, and the question is, what happens if we have a role concept where we basically derive the roles? How does that look like in the context of Fiori, especially when we're using the Fiori Launchpad? and in the background we replicate the roles. If you have derived role, for example, for multiple different locations, how does that play back into the Launchpad?
You will create one catalog, and this is your master catalog, and it is not necessary that you create derived catalog. Yeah, that makes no sense, because the catalog is the front end perspective, and it includes all application for the end user and the Fiori Launchpad. And then what happened when he clicking on the application, that is processing in the background. Yeah, and so it is not necessary that you create derived catalogs. Yeah, you create one catalog. This is the master catalog, and then include it in your master role, and then derived to the children roles. So it's not. Yeah, it's one catalog.
Yeah. And just to add on that, if you add the catalog to your single role on the backend system, then it pulls in the authorization objects, and that role in the backend you can derive.
Yeah,
because it looks the same. It's like your parent-child approach, and on the backend you obviously can replicate and derive those roles, but on the front end, the front end is one. You don't change the front end of the regular, as Jenny was explaining. Perfect. And let's see what else we have. So just have to quickly skim through them. There's a lot of answers or comments. There's one question in regards to segregation of duty conflicts and how we can perform SODs on the Fiori. So depending on what you're using, so if you use tools like access control GRC, or use the IAG, Identity Access Governance in the cloud, or pretty much any other application, the authorization check happens against the backend system, because that's where you have the critical authorizations, or the SODs, is on the backend. Now obviously we can have front and backend on the same, but the check usually happens against the backend. The big problem with access control and also IAG is the rule set, because the rule set is built in a way where we have the application and then we have the authorizations that go along with the application. Now obviously if you have a rule set, and maybe you have a custom rule set, what's missing is the Fiori component. So we don't have the entry point, which is the application, and that's very often why or that's not just very often, this is why you cannot use the old rule set for Fiori, because the entry point, the application up front, is different, and that needs to change. So if you have access control or IAG, there's rule sets available, standard rule sets available for Fiori, because you have to bring in those Fiori applications into the rule set. Other tools, like for example our tool, the XMS, we don't look into the application, we just look into the authorizations, because the authorizations, they didn't change. If you can create a PO from an ECC transaction or S4 HANA transaction, or from Fiori, in the background, it's still the same authorization checks. But because of the way SAP's tools, especially access control IAG, perform the SOD check, it doesn't work. You have to make sure that the rule set knows all those Fiori applications. That's important to remember. So if you use access control and IAG or one or the other, you have to definitely touch your rule set and you have to make updates. That's important. Jenny, did you see any other question?
I have an extension for this question. You will not get an information about the Fiori app. Yeah, what is the Fiori app? The Fiori app is in the most case a transaction in the background that will calling from the front-end server or a WebDumbro application. Yeah, and sometimes we will get UI5 apps, and then the OData service is calling. So the application is the OData service, a transaction, or WebDumbro. Yeah, So that is really important to know for the rule set. Yeah. So many Fiori apps calls transaction in the background. So the rule set is not really affected. It is affected why SAP decided to remove a transaction from the stack, from the S/4HANA release. Yeah, and you have to use a new one. Then it is also necessary to know for your rule set. But when you will not get any changes for transaction, then it is also possible that a calling from a Fiori application to this transaction and the rule set is done. Yeah. Yeah, and further analysis is here necessary.
Mm-hmm. Let's take maybe two more questions. They're already over the time, but I think there's a lot more. There was one regarding, now it just disappeared. There was one regarding the, sorry, it always disappears when I look at it. It was the question regarding when you add the catalog to the PFCG role, to the role menu. The question is that the person says that when they add the catalog and you go to the authorization data, it already pulls in services. And the question is, how do they know, or where can they find out which ones will be pulled in?
Yeah, the mapping to the Fiori ID is missing there in the PFCG. So in this case, you have to get to the content manager, and then you have the possibility to check the services for each app. So you will see which OData service is checking in the background for this app. Or you go to the Fiori App library. Yeah? This is your knowledge base for the Fiori app. So that you will find also the information which OData services are calling in the background for this app. So directly in the PFCG, it is not really possible to see, okay, this OData services is mapped to this Fiori app. Yeah. That is not possible. You see in the context menu that the OData service is using this authorization object and finish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there always the recommendation is always, if you build a catalog, before you go into PFCG and you add it to the role menu, go to the content manager and check the catalog, use the check services option. You can also say check service and display, and then you will see all the services. And if any of them is not active, you will get the red traffic light, and you can fix it before you go into the role. And that's very important, because if you don't do that, and you have inactive services, and you go into PFCG and you add the catalog, it only pulls the ones in that are active. And then the user goes and tries to run the application. They get an error message. That's the first thing. Then you have to figure out, and you see, oh, the catalog is not active, and the service is not active. You go to SICF or whatever is not active, and you activate. And then you tell the user, go ahead and test again, because now it's active. But now the user gets the next error because it's missing the authorizations, because the S service is not populated. So always make sure, go into Content Manager, check it up front, make sure everything is active, and then go into PFCG and pull it in, because then you get also all the proposals for the S service, and then everything should be working. I mean, there can still be issues, as we all know, but then the baseline should be there that it will work. Then we have one more, Jenny, regarding the front end and back end. They're saying that they used to have the central hub deployment, where basically front end and the back end into two different systems, and now they're consolidating, where we basically have the embedded approach with front and back end on the same system. And the question is regarding the roles, whether they can keep two separate roles or whether they have to merge them, and also what they should do with the pages and spaces, whether they can just move from groups into spaces or not.
Yes, when you migrate a central hub to embedded deployment, then you have to transport your Fiori catalogs, groups, or spaces to the backend server. And then you have to add this Fiori content to your backend roles. Yeah, in an embedded deployment, it is not possible to split it in two technical roles, because if you add a Fiori catalog to your PFCG role, then you will automatically add the proposal values. And so it is not possible to split in front-end services or front-end roles and back-end roles. That is technically not possible. Yeah, it's an embedded deployment, and so you will have PFCG roles, and the role menu will have GUI transaction, yeah, and Fiori catalogs, groups, or the new concept based on spaces.
Mm-hmm. And regarding the question, that they're using the groups today and whether they can just move on to spaces. We had the one session about that. It's not as straightforward, because you obviously have to build the spaces and the pages. It's a different design, but also from an authorizations perspective, we have to go back to the authorizations and make the changes in the roles. So it's a manual approach. There's no automatic migration. That's not possible. So it needs to be manual, and you have to design and try to convert it manually.
It's a manual approach. Yeah.
Yes. The one thing that we can do if you're looking into that, you might remember from the spaces can be used in two ways. We can either activate for everyone, and then they have to use the spaces, or we can do more like a soft way where we say space enabled by user, where basically every user for himself can decide whether they want to use the groups or the spaces. And for those customers that are using the groups approach today and then moving to the space approach, it's very much recommended to say, okay, start moving certain user groups onto the spaces and then enable the parameters so they can change for themselves. So it's kind of like a phased approach to get everyone moved over to the spaces approach. A big bang can also mean big problems. That's why we have that soft approach where we can just go user by user, and then piece by piece, you're basically building the space approach. But again, it's not automatically, you have to migrate. It's a manual effort. Great. And I think we're over time, Jenny. And I hope we had most of the questions answered. If we missed any, we'll get back to you by email. And Jenny, anything else, or?
No, thank you.
We're all happy and hungry. With that, everyone, thank you very much for your attention. Here we also have or my contact information. If anything else pops to your mind, just feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, we're looking forward to seeing all of you next week when we talk about access control, GRC, and also the identity access governance. So any questions you have, submit them up front, or otherwise then directly in the meeting, and me and my colleague will try to answer them as we try to do today. With that, thank you very much, everyone, and see you soon.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Alessandro.
Bye. See you.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.